What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and welcome back to another Modern video. And 3 weeks ago, we got some of the best news that we could have gotten for the Modern format, and that was the banning of Yorion the Sky Nomad. And Yorion ended up fueling a lot of powerful decks, a lot of 80 card decks, specifically the 4 and 5 color control slash elementals decks. I do kind of make that differential statement there because they did have different game plans, different things that they wanted to do, so on and so forth. But they all were able to work independently of Yorion, and Yorion just made those decks a lot better. Able to push it into the late game, get rid of the downside of the 2-for-1s from some of the pitch elementals, and just kind of get way super far ahead of your opponent. So today we're going to take a look at a 4-color control deck that has kind of moved on past Yorion and has kind of evolved since the banning, and I think with the help of some other cards that maybe could have joined the ban list at that time. We're just going to dive into the deck. We're going to see kind of the different changes and things that were made to keep the archetype relevant in the format. So let's go ahead and take a look at 4-color control for the modern format. So here we have the 4-color control deck by Justin Brickman. Went 6-1 in the NRG series trial in Newark, Ohio, going 6-1 in the modern format. Uh, this deck was posted on October 23rd. It's going to be roughly 9 days after the event has happened. But to me, I think this is probably where this deck wants to be in terms of just the full body of work. But before we get too deep into this crazy deck list and the transformation of 4-color control, be sure if you haven't already to subscribe to the channel, especially if you're new. I post videos like this all the time, including videos for the Pioneer format and some other stuff. I have a special video kind of planned for later this week, so be on the lookout for that. So of course, ring the notification bell so you can see all those types of posts when I make them. Of course, there's a link in the description to the Discord server. Go ahead, follow that link, and join the Discord server, and let's talk about Magic and fun stuff like that. With all that shilling out of the way, let's go ahead, dive into 4-color control. For those of you not familiar, Kahira is basically the only good companion left in the format. That Obosh, but you really don't see that many Obosh decks. You do see Kahira. Kahira does offer something special to the deck. Obviously, it's not as good as Yorion, or else Kahira would have seen play over Yorion. The condition to getting to play this as your companion, every creature in your starting deck has to be a cat, elemental, nightmare, dinosaur, or beast card. With that being said, the deck only plays 8 creatures, and if you are not already made aware of this, some of the blue-white control decks do, Kahira just gets to be a free creature in a deck that doesn't play any creatures. So if you have no creature cards in your deck, you technically fulfill Kahira's companion effect or ability. So you can just have Kahira as your companion, and you're a-okay. This deck obviously isn't doing that. It's playing a card that I think should have ended up on the ban list as well as Yorion and Omnath Locus Creation. 4 colors, only missing black in the mana cost. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. So already, if you're able to have this hit the battlefield, you are getting some kind of value out of it. And it has a landfall ability, which has 3 different triggers. If you trigger it the first time, you gain 4 life. Completely, not maybe doesn't completely nullify all aggressive archetypes and all aggressive decks that you could be playing, because the domain decks can be pretty aggressive and then go pretty big and can sometimes get over Omnath. But the fact that with fetch lands existing in the format, and different ways to play multiple lands on different turns and really trigger 2 to 3 of these abilities per turn. Gaining 4 life a turn is simultaneously the least of your worries and something you should be worried about if you're an aggressive deck. Getting to trigger it a second time, maybe off of like a fetch land or something like that, you're able to make a 5 mana play on the turn that Omnath comes into play just with 1 fetch land, which opens up Teferi Hero Dominaria being a super powerful card. Just super powerful Planeswalker can help you basically get up on mana and be a little bit cheaper. Drawing an extra card a turn definitely helps as well because you want to be hitting your land drops. You want to basically take over the game with Omnath Locus Creation. Obviously, there's some of these other spells. You can hard cast Leyline Bindings for the most part. Most of the time, you're able to cast this for 1 mana. Cast Dress Downs, cast Prismatic Endings for 4 different colors. So definitely, Omnath being a cornerstone of this deck is going to be a major player. Of course, if you're able to trigger a third time, it deals 4 damage to each opponent and each planeswalker you don't control. So you're able to actually control opposing red and sixes. You're able to oppose different Teferi Time Ravelers and Hero Dominarias on top of Jace the Mind Sculptors, Liliana the Veils, so on and so forth. All these Planeswalkers that we've come to know for the modern format and how good they can be. Omnath in one single turn can cast your own big Planeswalker, really put a aggro deck on the back foot, and get rid of their own Planeswalkers as well. Just a card that does it all, and a card that definitely should have been banned. On the flip side of that, there's another creature that's played in this deck, and that's Solitude. Versions of the four-color control deck I've seen that do not play the Risen Reef, and Risen Reef is one of the ways that you can immediately gain value from casting Solitudes, because you pitch a white card, bring in the Solitude enters, you trigger the Risen Reef, so on and so forth. You end up getting a card back, so instead of being 2-for-1ing yourself and getting rid of a creature, you're able to get rid of a creature and essentially draw a card or put a land into play. This version of the deck not doing that, just casting Solitude, I would say pretty close to fair as you're going to get. Also, very realistic that you can just hard cast it again, where like you have an Omnath into play, you have a uncracked fetch land, you play a land, crack the fetch land, add 4 colors of mana, make sure the land produces white, and you can just cast a Solitude and get rid of creatures that way, and just kind of really get super far ahead super early in the game. Moving on to like the Planeswalkers, we touched on Teferi Hero Dominaria. Definitely a win condition in two ways. You can just make an emblem, draw cards, and just get rid of all your opponent's permanents and make it very hard for them to be able to win the game. Teferi Hero Dominaria famously can also just tuck itself. So if you run out of cards, you can just hard cast a Teferi Hero Dominaria. You can target yourself, or you can target Teferi Hero Dominaria with its -3, put it back into your deck there from the top. It'll obviously be the top card because you do not have any more cards, and essentially just slowly mill your opponent out. You're going to exile a permanent every turn. And of course, you're going to get value and things like that from Omnath and stuff. From getting to play other lands that you pick up from Ren 6, which Ren 6, again, arguably is like another card that could end up on that ban list, and that can be a discussion that we have for another day. Until then, Ren 6 is definitely probably going to be and ever will be one of the best 2-drop planeswalkers that we have ever seen. Yes, I know Tibble from the Innistrad set exists, but Ren 6 is just so powerful that it even eclipses Tibble, which is amazing. This deck answers some of the things that it really wants to answer, like it answers Ragavans when you are on the play very effectively, making sure that you hit your land drops so you can hit your Omnath Locus of Creations on time, on top of also getting to trigger Omnath Locus of Creation multiple times. And the emblem can just win the game because we are playing some number of lightning bolts and such to actually physically burn out our opponent. On top of that, just getting to cast counter spells and prismatic endings and even the best cantrip in the format as well off of Ren 6. For Teferi Time Raveler, obviously, getting to cast Expressive Iterations, Prismatic Endings are pretty sweet at instant speed, but this does play a critical role in the Cascade decks because it does stop the Cascade decks from getting to cast their spell once they cascade into it. A lot of decks that want to play reactively, like in the blue-white matchups, they have a lot harder of a time dealing with Teferi Time Raveler because their counterspells are effectively useless. They have to play more sorcery speed, and even if they like cast a Wrath or whatever to clear your board, Teferi Time Raveler is still in play. It is still getting you some number of like some advantage, and you're getting to cast like your sorceries at instant speed, and on top of that, just make sure that your spells resolve. So Teferi Time Raveler we know is a problem in Pioneer, and Pioneer got rid of it. Modern, it still has Teferi Time Raveler, um, and really just even going through like the rest of the cards, like we have the best cantrip that's in the format, Expressive Iteration, and all the nuances that go into playing that card, minus the bauble tricks and things like that, because this deck doesn't play bauble. And quite frankly, it's a deck that doesn't need bauble to make Expressive Iteration a very, very powerful card. Counterspell, straight up counter target spell. Still very good. Definitely allows you to kind of get ahead and stop your opponents from getting farther ahead when you need it to. Also, just a good tempo play as well. Prismatic Ending, just a catch all to any permanents that you might have trouble, particularly things that cost 4 or less. You have Dress Down, which will kind of stop your opponent's pitch elementals, their own Ragavans, so on and so forth. Tons of good creatures that have static abilities, tons of good creatures that have good ETBs, so on and so forth. Dress Down, at the worst case, getting to cycle and then draw a card. Again, all the tricks, all the interactions come up Dress Down. Uh, further making this deck a rather hard deck to pilot to get every single little bit of value that you can and to play this deck optimally. And you just add a card like Dress Down to make it infinitely harder. But thankfully, Leyline Binding is here. It is basically 1 mana removal for any non-land permanent until this leaves the battlefield. Very hard to deal with enchantments in the format. I mean, you have people that are playing Besaiju's, but just getting to spend 1 mana and they have to spend 2 mana to get rid of it most of the time is pretty good. And you're maybe not okay necessarily with that exchange, but you are getting lands, and if you have Omnath in play, so on and so forth, you do just kind of get to generate a ton of value and go super far ahead of your opponent if they're dealing with leyline bindings, let's say for your Omnaths or your Planeswalkers. The mana base, we are playing one Beseiju of our own. There's basically free. It feels like obviously green isn't so much necessarily the best color because like you don't have abundant growth anymore that you're playing, but just having removal in the main deck essentially for artifacts, enchantments, or lands is pretty good, and you can get away with playing that. You have breeding pools, hollowed fountains. You have an Otawara like your other channel land, just a very good catch-all to a bunch of other annoying permanents. You have triomes in Rogran Triome. You have Zagoth Triome, which is the Sultai Triome. I believe you had one more. No, of course not. So you have Zagoth Triome, and then you have Rogran Triome. Just a way to make sure you have all your colors and are able to cast Leyline Bindings for free, essentially, because you do have this Zagoth Triome, which I guess in turn means that you can exile things 5 or less with Prismatic Ending, as in as if this card wasn't already just super good on its own. Of course, you have a mishmash of fetch lands that can go get your Triomes and your other shock lands, as well as playing one of each basic. Looks like minus the obviously minus the swamp and minus the mountain. This is a way that you can play around Blood Moon and ensure that you can cast Omnath Locus of Creation. Because this deck super hardcore leans on Omnath. This deck is very powerful. It plays a lot of very powerful cards, but Omnath Locus of Creation arguably being one of the best decks or one of the best cards that you can be playing in the format. Real quickly to the sideboard, Chalice of the Void is just a turn one answer to those Cascade decks. Can also answer some of the other like 1s and 2 drops if you set it to it. That is. This definitely has multiple applications than just the straight up application of stopping the Cascade decks, and can be very well positioned if you can really get your opponent. Also very good like against burn, just stopping a lot of their 1 drops and things like that. More Besaiju's, you have Veil of Summer, just for more protection against like counter spells, against removal and the like. You have another counter spell. You have Uncounterable Negate in the sideboard because your mana base is able to support the 2 colors rather than just playing like negates and things like that. You have another Dress Down on the board. Dress Down again can be a very powerful card in the matchups where it's super good. Creates some very interesting dynamics and can create some timing issues for your opponent as well as yourself. So always be careful when playing Dress Down and make sure you fully understand how things are going to work once you play it. And 2 Supreme Verdict for those decks that want to go wide. I'd assume that you'd probably want to bring this in against like maybe like the domain decks, just because your Solitude 2 for 1ing yourself when you are behind is never going to be all that great. So Supreme Verdict is a way you can catch up against some of the decks that really want to go wide. And that is the 4 color control deck for the modern format. Overall, this deck is, of course, sweet. I think a lot of the decks that we go over are awesome. Omnath Locus Creation, super busted card. This card is amazing. And the fact that I knew that a 4 color or 5 color control deck was going to exist, and it was only going to exist solely on the fact that Omnath was going to exist. We saw this card exist when we had people using the commands to cycle the Mystic Sanctuaries, or Cryptic Command, that's the card. Cryptic Command to cycle Mystic Sanctuary to essentially like counter your opponent's spell and just really put them in a rough spot, and then also getting to combo that with Field of the Dead to make zombies while you're doing it and making 1 to 2 2/2s every turn while getting to counter your opponent's most relevant spell and picking up a land to then further put your aggro opponents in the dirt by just getting to gain life from playing Mystic Sanctuaries and things like that. Of course, all the other cards in this deck are broken. Prismatic Ending ended up being probably one of the better removal spells that you can be playing in the format currently. Expressive Iteration, the best cantrip in the format. Lightning Bolt is just Lightning Bolt. This card is so sweet. Look, it just deals 3 damage. Ren and 6 can only deal 1 damage. Um, But that being said, Ren 6 probably being the best Planeswalker you can play in the format. On top of Teferi Hero Dominaria being probably an even better Planeswalker than Jace the Mind Sculptor, strictly on the fact that it ends up being a 3 mana card that at any point you get to untap with a Teferi Hero Dominaria, you are going to run away with the game and make it very hard for your opponent to catch up. This deck is very hard to deal with. I don't think necessarily a problem yet per se, but definitely the fact that the 4 color control decks and the reason why that Yorion was banned and things like that, uh, it's definitely a reason to probably look back at the drawing board and maybe look at like Omnath or Ren and 6 or even like maybe not Teferi Dominaria, but like Omnath Logos Creation and Ren and 6 as like possible cards to ban because I think the rest of the deck is fine for the most part. Solitudes, I'm not really a big fan of these pitch elementals just because they're good. Of course they're good. But I just don't like them. I'm a boomer at heart. But yeah, so that's the deck. I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a like. Show some support to the channel as well by subscribing and ring the notification bell so you catch videos like this, you catch Pioneer videos, and you catch any other videos and stuff that I upload. I will hopefully be streaming very, very soon, as long as I can get all the logistics and stuff together and find a good time to schedule streams and stuff like that. You'll all be the first to see them, and hopefully getting to make a ton more content. It's kind of life starts to slow down. We're starting to get into the holidays, but hopefully like less events that require more time and effort will be in the past, at least for the time being. So that's gonna do it for me in this video. I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope to see you all in the next one.